Good morning, Dharma friends. Theruvan Saranai. Let us begin by paying homage to Buddhothpado Aryan Mahanse, our noble friend and Kalyana Mitra. Having transcended personhood, he guides others to directly see the Dharma within themselves, enabling an inner transformation that leads beyond the notion of self. Through this rare guidance, we are invited not to believe, but to observe and realize the truth through our own experience. For more than 5 years, he has tirelessly served by expounding over 12,000 sermons for the welfare of those seeking liberation. We offer our heartfelt appreciation for this compassionate effort to eliminate the path shown by the Buddha. May he be blessed with a long life and good health. Ayubo and Theruvan Saranai. So we were talking about the penetrative insight yesterday, how it's not fiction, but penetrative insight is from wherever you are based on the Dhamma that you listen to. You drill through layers and layers of our current understanding to really see how the mind works within yourself. In Pali, it's called Vidarshana. Some people call it Vipassana, but it's not the same. If you refer to Pali texts, Buddhist scripts, they're used interchangeably, but there's a very subtle difference. We know some, if let's say there's a good chef and there's like a regular person who's not that experienced in cooking, and they're both reading recipes to make something, and this person who doesn't have much experience with cooking will just read the recipe, and he will have no idea as to how the recipe will turn out, what kind of issues that he or she will run into while cooking it, what kind of things that are not mentioned in the recipe that he might or might not need ahead of time. But a chef will know just based on the understanding of he has of different materials, different processes, different timings. He will exactly know, even before making the dish, how it will taste like, what kind of taste combinations will be there, how to improve it even without cooking it. That's because based on all his experience, he examines the reality of how these materials will interact based on time and temperatures. So, and similarly, there are metal fabricators who are with years of experience. They have a really good understanding as to how materials will different structural materials will behave in a structure. without doing any calculations an engineer would do. How it how they behave under different loadings. What kind of strengths a round tube will have over a square tube, how different thicknesses will affect the structure. And if we look at our own surrounding, people who have done some craft for a period of time, they have an innate understanding of how things work. That is not fiction, that is their experience, and without redoing it, they can revisit their experience and look at certain pieces of materials and different conditions, and with an unbiased view predict what's going to happen in a certain situation. So vidarshana or penetrative insight is something like that. You've had a mind since you were a child. All of us have minds. We just have looked at in a different way, not from this angle, not from this unbiased angle, but this is kind of a training that you are getting. It's a very subtle training to look at your own mind in the light of these new new pieces of information that you're learning here. So when we say the mind is, there's no existing mind. Mind is whatever the thought you have right now, whatever your attention lands on right now, that is the mind. You do not accept it as, you do not accept it blindly, you do not reject it blindly, you examine within. Is that so? What are the evidence that I could look at? How does my in within my mind, how does my mind behave? So you take a very in, good inward look at your own mind to see if this is the case. Just like a good chef will look at his experience to understand how different materials and situations, timing would behave based on his experience. So that is the entire path we talk about understanding this Dhamma in the form of knowledge. That is the first thing, and that is not enough. And then you have to kind of see how your mind unfolds in real time as and when situations arise. When your wife tells you something that you do not like, when you think, when your wife annoys you, your husband annoys you, when you get into a situation where your car won't work, you have to take it to the garage, or all of a sudden you have some chest pains, or you run into a very dangerous situation on the road while driving, whatever your situation may be, or you learn that um, there's like some serious sickness in one of one of your loved ones. Someone is terribly sick. So as and when these situations arise, you you do not blame anyone, but you take an inward look and try to see why, if you're upset, if you're sad, if you're angry, whatever it is, why is that? How does that mind behave in that particular situation? Does it get angry? Does it get upset? What is the nature of that feeling? And not just that, if you have done your penetrative insight, if you have tried to see this Dhamma, how whatever we talk about here, the Dhamma, if it makes sense, why is it the truth or no? While listening to these sermons, then those um, insights you had while listening to the sermons will appear in those situations. You will have very subtle kind of light bulb moments. You might run into an accident and there could be like some, you feel like your heart is pounding or something, and then all of a sudden these insights come to you. You start thinking about, now what am I going to do? Do I call insurance? Oh my God, I won't be able to go to work without a car. It'll be expensive to rent a car or something. And then there will be a break and these insights will come to you. That these thoughts are different to what actually happened. Thoughts have nothing to do with, well, it seem like they're connected, but the experience of having thoughts are different from experience of looking at something, listening to something. So that insight that appears moment to moment as you go through life is very important. That is the difference in the path. Just as when we learn how a magician performs its magic tricks, we don't get surprised by his magic tricks whenever he performs the same magic trick for the next time. So, same thing happens here when you have thoughts and, like, in a difficult situation, and those insights come to you to show that when the mind unfolds in real time, that the thoughts are a byproduct of just the raw sensory experience of seeing, listening, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touch. When that insight appears in real time, moment to moment, the realization slowly settles that it's the thoughts are a mental construct. And just like you will not be surprised when the next time the magician performs his trick, the next time, probably the next time also, you will be like upset when you come across a situation like that. Again, these kind of insights will appear, truth will emerge in these situations. And over a period of time, if these kind of things are things that you have the most clinging to, aversion to, then they will require the emergence of the truth enough many times. But with time, you will see these situations will arise and there won't be that harsh feelings. The internal burning will slowly be diminished. And there comes a day, whatever happens in the so-called external, there's no shock, there's no strong emotional reaction to that. So that is just a glimpse of where we are headed and what it looks like, what's the purpose of learning all this. And with time it comes to a very peaceful state where nothing can shatter your world, because the realization is there of the depth, breadth, and the length of this illusion that they're all a mental construct. The so-called self is also a mental construct. We know when, based on how our egos have formed, when we go to a place, the ego wants to know that you're being recognized, that you're being cared for, that you're being given the spotlight. You may probably go to a wedding, get dressed nicely, go to a salon, get your hair done, all that, and then you look around to get that acceptance, those comments that we've accepted as that is how it is, that is how it should be. I mean, it's all well and good, it doesn't bother us. Where it bothers us is we don't see that these thoughts, they're not they're not a problem, they don't bother us. But when you become old, when you're 67, even no one looks at you, now the pain comes. It hurts. No one gives you the attention you once had. No one gives you that spotlight you once had. You don't feel good looking, checking yourself in the mirror. You don't have that confidence anymore. But you have to understand that those emotions are not a byproduct of growing old, but the thoughts started when we nourished those thoughts about getting recognition, getting the spotlight, seeking attention, seeking compliments when we were young, going to different places. That's where the problem started. Of course, if you were seeking, this is not something seeking them actively, actually. This is how the mind works. This is how the mind behaves based on things we hear, based on things we are exposed to, based on kind of relationships we have. And, we might see our mothers getting dressed very nice, all the members in the family, getting dressed very well, going to a place with a lot of care. So these just the mind kind of mimics. We see the monkey sees, the monkey does, like that the mind does the same thing. Yet we think we do it. Every time something is done, every time the mind does something, there's an underlying thought that I'm doing it, I'm doing that. I did this, I did that. I am going to do this, I'm going to do that. So these thoughts, of course, if these thoughts seek attention, recognition, compliments, when it doesn't have them at some other point in time, the mind goes to suffering. But underlying this seeking compliments, not getting them, when you grow old, underlying all that, there is the assumption that there is a world out there, there is a self here. So I need these compliments and validation. But if we go back to what we were talking yesterday, the wall becomes the raw sensory, the raw visual of a wall doesn't contain the name wall. That's been given when we were children. Those sounds, wall, 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 wall. They were given, and that sound was entangled with the image of the so-called word. The image is not a wall without the sound. The sound, when I say wall, 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 does it have a wall in it? It's just a sound. How can a sound has a wall in it? Over the phone, the speaker of the phone, you can hear when I say wall, wall. It doesn't have any cement or uh, wood or whatever your walls are made up of. So the sound wall doesn't have a wall, the image wall doesn't have a wall, but yet when they're tangled, there's somehow a wall. Something is created out of nothing. Similarly, we created if there is a wall, there is a self who sees this wall. So not only we see the wall, we see the wall, we think, we feel that I am seeing the wall. Let's say there are a few different walls and there are a few different people, one from China, one from India, one from America, and another person who doesn't speak a language. A Chinese wall is in the Chinese person's mind, an Indian wall is in the Indian person's mind, as in the word they use will be the Chinese, the English, or in the Hindi, or whatever the language they speak. The person who doesn't speak anything, I mean, let's assume this unique situation where he has no idea of this world. So he wouldn't, like, he's probably an alien. He wouldn't have any, he will just have a blank stare at the so-called world while everybody's experiencing a war. This person just experience blank vision. So for the Chinese person is, or whatever he or his or her name is, that person is looking at a wall. For the Indian person, Indian person with a name, Indian name, is looking at a wall. For the English speaking person, whatever his or her name is, that person, David or Paul or David, is looking at a wall. If there's no one to claim ownership of the experience, there's no wall. I mean, there could be millions of trees in the Amazon rainforest. Nobody's like, we have no proof that right now anybody is looking at any tree or whatever. So if there's no observer, that claim cannot be given. What is being observed is an experience of the mind of the observer. Even to say it in that terms, it is not the absolute truth yet, because it runs much deeper. If you can look around right now without this sense of a self, without I'm looking at this, I'm looking at that, drop that self angle, and if you can just look at whatever is around you, take a good look, turn your head, look at the so-called tables, the so-called chairs, the so-called walls. you will begin to see what this blank stare is, this blank listening is, the blank smelling, blank tasting, blank touching. You can extend it to, you should, and you can extend this, the experiencing things this way. Not that you think of this thing and behave that way, just to get an understanding. So that what we explain, try to explain here makes sense. This is part of our investigation experience. We call it RA investigation. ARYA. Means without the sense of self. This, but eventually, what we will get at is sustained happiness, sustained peace, sustained contentment without the sense of a self. This is the path to transcend personhood, beinghood. But it's not by avoiding thoughts, saying that self is not this. The thoughts that come to you, the thoughts say that, there is a school of thought that teaches it like that. They say, okay, what are the thoughts that come to your mind, like a guided meditation? Are you thinking about your past? Are the thoughts about the past you? No, then you drop that thought. Are you thinking about the future? Are the thoughts about the future you? No, you do drop that thought. Um, do you have any tingling sensations in your body? Are they you? Then you discard that also. So, like that, whatever thoughts, sensations, feelings you have, you discard, and they say, this watcher, who is watching all this? That is you. This is not that. This is not that practice. We explain how the mind is created, not to avoid it. When we understand how the mind is created and we see it within ourselves, how it's created, how every thought is a product of coming together of sounds, images, smells, taste, touch, you won't be deceived for a thought. The weight of a thought is not felt the same way anymore because you realize what it is in reality. And that's not avoiding thoughts, that's seeing the truth beneath how the mind is created. And we dig deeper, we penetrate this seeking of the truth, this investigation even further. What we see, the images, the colors. Images is also a label. They're made up of colors and the shapes that, the color, when we say color, yellow ball, yellow triangle. If you examine those two, the difference is the shape. It could be the same yellow, but the difference is the shape. So colors and shapes. But colors and shapes are also sounds, labels that's given to the visual experience. So we strip everything down to the raw sensory experience. I am looking at a yellow ball. Another person who's nearsighted is looking at a ball. Another person who's farsighted is looking at a ball. A person who's colorblind is looking at a ball. Let's say we're looking at a red ball. We are not even looking at the same ball, we are not even looking at the same red. Our experience is limited by the capabilities of our eyes, of our ears. If we are listening to something, three different people, one is hard of hearing, one is wearing hearing aids, one has normal hearing. They're hearing different things. We can't even properly know what the experience of the other person is, because we can never be that person to experience what he or she is hearing, to compare against our own experience. Let's say there's a cat, there's a dog, there's an elephant, there's a dolphin. If they're all looking at the same thing, their experience will be difficult. It will be in different colors. The fine lines will not be fine lines for some. The lighting conditions will not be the same lighting conditions for certain animals. Something will look like um, a bat would see like a night vision kind of a vision. A cow will see something different, a dog, cat. So even though we think we share the same world, we do not share the same world. Our human experience have similarities, even then they are different in subtle ways. But across humans, animals, the experience is vastly different. Even though we think our beloved dog sitting next to us, we live in the same world, we do not. His experience is a totally different experience. Since we are human, since we have the language, we are able to relate to something, communicate, thinking that they live in the same world, but that's not the truth, even across humans. The experience is too various, it's varying. Buddha said, Nanatha Kaya, Nanatha Sanya, meaning different bodies, different perceptions. That's why the Dharma is being explained in many different angles, because when Buddha come across a person, a seeker of truth, or whom he feels like is able to understand this deep truth, he delivers this truth in a uniquely customized way to that particular person's mind. So that's why in Tripitaka, or they call it three baskets of the Bali Canon, the main doctrine in which Theravada Buddhism is written. I think across all Buddhist traditions, it's the most concise collection of scripts or discourses expounded by Lord Buddha. This nature of the mind is explained in so many different angles, to the extent that by just simply trying to see this, by reading this book, is next to impossible to get an idea of how the mind works. So if someone like that fabricator we talked about, who is able to examine his own experience and get a higher experiential insight about how materials work, then he is such kind of a person who has done a similar investigation about the mind, is able to see this truth in the book. But it's very difficult to just by reading the book grab all this, because mind is not a thing that's written in a book. Mind doesn't Let's say we write hatred in a book, Hatred, piece of paper, white, black ink. Is that visual representative of hatred you feel when someone does something that you don't like? Hatred or kindness or whatever it is. The feeling you feel is different to the word written in the book. So these feelings, the nature of the mind cannot be written in a book. By writing it in a book, it dilutes its meaning. Then we have to use the currency of exchange here, the words, which dilutes the meaning. Your chair is different to my chair. When we write chair on a book, my version of the chair, which is this big chair that I used to have in my house when I was growing up, my father would rest after work, which is rattan and wooden, now gets converted into some other chair that you have. Probably it's upholstered, probably it's reclining. With the use of this currency, the words, the meaning became something else. But the importance of the Kalyana Mitra, or the noble friend, is since he had already transcended the personhood, he sees without the lens of a self. So if somebody is with a lens of a self, he can see through how this other person's self is created, and the communication could be done in a way that what happened to my, when we said, when I said chair, whatever happened to the chair that I was trying to communicate became some other version of a chair, won't happen. The noble friend is able to create that internal transformation in a very unique way. That's why Buddha emphasized the importance of a noble friend. When disciple Anandathero asked Buddha, Venerable Sir, this Buddha Sasana, or the Buddhist doctrine, as in not a written doctrine, but the passing of the transformation, the passing of the internal transformation to transcend personhood, is it it depends 50% based on the noble friend, right? That's what Anandathero asked Buddha. And Buddha said, no, Anand, don't say like that. This entire passing of transformation, of transcending the personhood from one person to another, depends entirely on the noble friend. And Buddha showed 4 factors that gets you to this path. The first one is the associating the noble friend, listening to this Dhamma expounded by the noble friend, being in the moment and observing your mind, and continuously trying to see this Dhamma within yourself. That is the path. That's where the path begins. And that's where the path ends too. The necessity of the noble friend, that is very, very important. There's no path without a noble friend. There has to, just by memorizing these things, nobody's able to create that internal transformation within someone else. let's say there's this, okay, pyramids of Egypt. Someone has Googled, learned about it, l- read, someone has read extensively about the pyramids, how they're built, and the years, the purposes, the theories, the roads that are leading to them, that how to take the trip, what's required, how to pack, all that. And there's another person who really goes to pyramids and they have taken the walk, climbed the stairs, seen how it feels inside, the temperatures, how it feels to touch them. The experience of how people from that area, what kind of ideas and what kind of beliefs they have about these pyramids, what their unique experiences have been. So, this person who went to pyramids, he has a real sensory experience. He has a, and if we ask him how the pyramids were, he was like, it was like this. He said, it was so tall. It's the most magnificent thing I've ever seen in my life. You feel like you've been transported to this place in history. Whereas the person who read about pyramids will be like, there's something called pyramids. Haven't you have you visited them? It seems like that's a good place to go in your next trip. Look at the difference in language they talk. Something similar happens. A person who hasn't transcended personhood can talk about it, but he has no idea what he's talking about. He has never experienced the experience of transcending personhood. Whereas a person really transcended personhood can see the personhood of the other person, the ego of the other person, how this world has become real to the other person, how the other person doesn't see how these sounds, smells, tastes, images, and touches create the mind, how the ignorance of the other person, the avidya. So there's a clear difference. And the person who has only read about the personhood cannot influence or create that internal transformation. This is a gradual internal transformation that takes place wherever you start from. You could have gone through a lot in life. You could have been damaged as a kid. You could have gone through therapy several times with no sustainable, not results. You're probably taking some medication to manage these situations. But if you really understand how your mind works, how your desires, how the clinging aversion works, how this non existent thing became an existent thing to you, you will not get upset about anything. You will not get sad. You will not get mad. Slowly, these difficult feelings will not subside, they will be dissolved. This is not a temporary disappearance, but a permanent transformation. And with that, the absence of these feelings create a happiness that's not conditional on material conditions. If I have this, I will be happy. If I graduate, I will be happy. When I get married, I will be happy. When I have children, I will be happy. They're all conditions. When I have this, I will be happy. These conditions uh, created by the so-called self, the so-called mind. Even though we say so-called self, there's no self, but at this point for a, for an internal transformation to happen within a person, there has to be a noble friend who has transcended the personhood. And then we talked about how he's able to see through the ego uh, of a lay person, of a mundane person. We call someone who does not have, who does not have this understanding and realization about how the mind works. Um, we call them, in the context of Dharma, we call them a mundane person or mundane plane. Um, so this transmission of the internal transformation is entirely depending on the noble friend. And so when one sees whatever we call our lives, from the so-called birth to so-called death, and whatever in between is a story in our minds. You can think about everything that happened to you in the past, all the bad things, all the good things, everything in between, without even having to leave the chair that you're sitting on right now. And we cannot even find any proof to whatever happened except for your thought. If you said your mom treated you poorly, your mom's story will be different. People who experience that situation, those situations will be different. So it's just a story in a mind. And even this, so whatever our story is, our own unique story is a mental construct. Just like how the mother is created, an image was entangled with the sound. How the color yellow, ball, bat, everything was created. Democracy, marriage, company, whatever things that are seemingly existent, and also things that there's no physical existence, such as democracy, socialism. We cannot, pinpoint a location and say this is socialism and this is capitalism. It's an entire, it's a collection of lots of concepts, lots of ideas that are, lot of thoughts that are made up of images, sounds predominantly. But if you zoom in on certain pieces by which these ideas are made up of, you will see that it has all these elements: smells, tastes, touches, all that. So we live in a mentally constructed world, thinking that we live in an expansive world that has been existing from some point in history to some point in the future. But what we have is this moment. This is not a knowledge. You can experience it within you. If you followed these discourses, you will see that it makes sense logically. And if you investigate it within your own human experience, who better to experience or investigate your own mind than yourself? Do it. We don't need a scientist to do that. He or she will have no idea about your own mind. You're the scientist of your own mind. If you can investigate this within you, you will see that there's only this moment. Initially, yes, logically, but moment by moment, as you begin to see, every time you kind of creep into a thought and go to this mentally constructed world, how dare my mother did treated me this way, parents are not supposed to treat kids this way, I was being neglected, I was abandoned, whatever the thoughts. When you're in those thoughts, it feels so real. You can see the images in the eye of the mind. It feels like you're reliving the entire situation, but if you can take a step back and see how those thoughts were created, how the thought of a mother, this current thought, those situations, how those mental images were created in the first place. Every time revisit, you have these painful thoughts, take a step back and do this experiment investigation. With time, slowly but surely, these the belief in these thoughts, the understanding that these thoughts are real, they really happened to me, slowly dissolve. And the weight it had on you, the grasp these thoughts had on you, these thoughts had on your story, on yourself, on your being, slowly diminish, dissolve. And the absence of these, just like how you would push a rubber ball and try to keep it under the water, you have to continue to give effort, give that force to keep it underwater. But when that pressure is no longer there, it's a relief. You don't, until you do this investigation within you, it takes time. We've been listening to these sermons for more than 5 years now, and we've practiced every minute of every day, trying to understand what this mind is. Every time there's some sort of restlessness, some sort of anger, some sort of pain, we would go back to see how that particular thought was created, how that particular belief in a thought was created. If there's a self really existing in a thought, my mother treated me poorly is a thought. There's a mother in that thought. There's a self in that thought. There's an idea of a mother treating a child in that thought. How to treat a child well, how to mistreat a child, how to treat a child well, a mother taking care of a child, an image of that, how to mistreat, how were you abused, there's an image of that. An image is nothing but colors and shapes. Do Are these colors and shapes in your mental image, did they exist somewhere, or did they come into existence when we started thinking about the self that is in that thought? Is it a real self, or is it just a thought about a self? So this kind of investigation is what we are referring to. Based on the Dhamma you listen to, this kind of investigation is of utmost importance moment to moment. You will definitely see the grip being loosened and the tranquility that comes within, because this is unconditional. It's not fixated on anything. If I have a car, I will be happy. If I have that, I will be happy. That's conditional happiness. This is unconditional. When the conditions are removed by seeing the truth about how these thoughts are created, that kind of tranquility, that kind of happiness you have never experienced in life. And that is slowly but surely you become like a feather. There's idea of no idea of an existing world holds you, but that doesn't take anything away from your life. You will be performing whatever your daily activities the same way. You will be going to work, you will be taking care of children, you will be taking care of your wives, your husbands, your businesses, your responsibility towards your parents. Everything will stay the same. But that internal judgment, how dare you talk to me? How would you do that? This you against the whole world, you fighting the whole world to keep your sanity, keep your conditional happiness. That need is no longer there. You're not seeking anything, you're home. You must have heard these things before, but this is something different. This is not avoiding thoughts. This is not momentarily coming to a state through meditation. This is sustainable path of understanding and realizing how your own thoughts are created, so that what arises, not even what arises, but wherever, whatever the initial state in which you enter this path is now transformed into an unconditional state where it doesn't believe in an external world. Not that it doesn't exist or that it does exist, but how it came into existence is clearly seen within, and how this so-called self in the same mechanism came into existence is clearly seen within. There's no need to cling. There's no aversion, there's no delusion. And what's left is enormous amount of compassion, loving kindness, sympathetic joy, equanimity. Why there's no self now interfering in any kind of communications we do. If there's a self, that self wants the best. But that self wants recognition, more. That self needs more and more and more. Today you like to eat something. You're like, oh my God, I'm going to have that expensive steak, or I'm going to make that, um, I'm going to try that new recipe. And you're like, oh my God, this is so tasty. I love it. And you'll, go to the same restaurant or make that same recipe enough many times. And you're like, it's not exciting anymore. And you have to find another thing to now replace that same excitement you gained from, uh, before by trying these recipes or new restaurants. Now it needs to be replaced with something else, something more. That's why the billionaires, however much they have, they're not enough. They want the next thing. They want to they want to control their houses. They want to have bigger houses. They want to control bigger houses. They want to have bigger areas for themselves. They want to be prominent in the society. They want to have their say in the political arena. They want to populate different planets even. It's nothing is ever enough for this mind. That is the nature of the mind. But if you see how the mechanism in which the mind works, you will not be deceived by these urges to have more, because you know how it works. You're not deceived by the pigeon being pulled from the sleeve of the magician. You know how the pigeon was carefully kept earlier. There's no magical pigeon coming out of a sleeve. When you see how the magic trick is performed, you're not deceived anymore. You're not deceived by the desires. You're not deceived by the needs for more and more. You're not deceived by the hatred these thoughts bring about, sadness these thoughts bring about. You just watch it. There's not even you watching eventually. It's just an experience. This human experience is just an experience. It's not somebody else's experience. So I think that's enough for the day. We had some disturbances. I apologize for that. And Theron Sarnai, Dr. Ravi, Theron Sarnai, Aran Let's meet again tomorrow.